Today's sermon, Meeting of Friends, Finding Peace and Friends Among the Chaos of Today. A few months ago, I developed the concept of maybe wanting to revisit our Quaker-style sermon that I did a few years ago. And of course, when you revisit a concept that you've already done, you always reach out and you talk to members of the congregation that may have been there and experienced the situation. And I was snowed in up in Minnesota, so I called Jan and said, I'm thinking about doing this again. You know, what would you think if we had a Quaker-style sermon where we just, sat in silence and let people share as things came to them? And we discussed kind of what the reception had been to the service the last time around. And I took a more personal approach today in the concept of the Quaker sermon. And instead, over the last few weeks, I've chosen to incorporate silence into a part of my day-to-day life. And in doing so, I am sharing some of the things that came to the surface during that. Today's sermon ties into the first three principles of the UUA with a focus on friends, and our friends help us in living out those principles. Per Merriam-Webster, a friend is defined as one attached to another by affection or esteem. Maybe you don't call these people your friends. Here's some synonyms for that: alter ego, amigo, buddy, chum, compadre, your comrade, now we're all communists, confidant, crony, familiar, intimate, mate, your musketeer, or your pal. What's the difference between friends and acquaintances? People often distinguish between an acquaintance and a friend, holding that the former should be used primarily to refer to someone whom one is not especially close with. Many of the earliest uses of acquaintance were in fact in reference to a person with whom one was very close, but the word is now generally reserved for those who are known only slightly. Acquaintance is often paired with nodding, although nodding acquaintance sounds like it describes a person who is known just enough to nod at. It tends to be used instead to refer to a thing or field with which one has a small amount of knowledge or familiarity, and this is the meaning of the phrase since that time. My experience with Quaker meetings is simply one of an acquaintance. It is not something that I am well versed in. It's not something that I've directly experienced. But I've read the Spark Notes, the Cliff Notes on it, And that's how I came to find that we maybe needed to discuss what our friends were. And of course, I said I was tying them into the first three principles. Let's do a refresher on the first three principles for those of us, myself included, who might need some help keeping things straight. Principle number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Principle number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Principle number 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. I'm going to let that sink in now for a moment. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. We're not even all the way through the 7 principles. And as Unitarian Universalists, we have already tasked ourselves with things that at times, situations, and depending on the person, can be extremely difficult. What some might even consider impossible, and downright draining to the bone for many of us, depending on the situation. It is too simple a task to live out our 3 principles in our daily lives. But if we stop and think for a moment, imagine what our planet would look like if as a whole, every human practiced those first 3 principles. Many of you would tell me that sounds like an unrealistic expectation. And maybe you're right. But if we can't change the world, then let us think about the people in this room. What if we as a whole chose to make a conscious effort every day to live our life by those principles? What impact would that have on Sioux City and Greater Siouxland? What impact would it have on the people in this room? Inherent worth and dignity of every person, equity, compassion, encouragement. We might truly make an impact in the lives of others and a dent in how our local communities thrive. Of course, living up to these 3 principles, in doing so, we are not proselytizing and telling people to convert to being a Unitarian, because that's just not realistic. Because that's not our purpose, too. In living these principles, we are simply creating an environment for people to feel accepted, loved, and the opportunity for them to be themselves. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts that we can give, not only to ourselves, but also to others. And that's where it tied me back to friendship. What is the greatest gift that we can give to our friends and to our acquaintances? The gift of accepting them for who they are and encouraging them with compassion in their own journeys, wherever they may lead. Now, the task is not easy, and certain individuals will challenge us to our core when it comes to practicing what we preach. For many of us, maybe Donald Trump comes to mind. Thankfully, Donald doesn't live in Sioux City, and from what I know, none of us have to deal with him directly. So we have the luxury in that we can focus on the world around us and not be intimidated by the chaos of the swamp in Washington, D.C. That chaos in D.C. ties into my next point of today's sermon. How often have we let the external, and for that matter, at times the internal chaos, prevent us as individuals from making friends and finding peace? How many times has the ring of the cell phone, the lack of attendance, the lack of a response, the music on the radio, stopped us from finding peace in our lives and making friends with others? At times, maybe we're so overwhelmed by it all that we stopped ourselves from initiating the change process. Because why bother? What impact could I possibly have? What impact could I possibly have? On Monday night, we were given a prime example of the impact that as individuals that we can have in our community. Several of us joined in participating in the Martin Luther King Day celebration over at Mayflower Congregational, and a few sang in the choir. Right there, our voices, our physical voices, were making an impact in the community. During the course of the evening, Sioux City Councilwoman Rhonda Capron stood up and shared her experience in dealing with Marguerite Cordes and the impact that she had on Rhonda. Many of you are not aware of this story, as I was not until she shared it that day. Marguerite's husband had been a surgeon in Harlem at the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was stabbed and almost died. Marguerite's husband's passion was to become a doctor and eventually become a surgeon, which at the time as an African American was no easy feat. The friendships he made and the following of his passion is how he made an impact. And without people like Marguerite's husband in the room that day, we may never have had the March on Washington. So through friendship, compassion, and equity, change took place in the world that we are all thankful for. And little do we know that those incidences came all the way back to Sioux City, Iowa eventually, and made an impact on our local community. So, climate change, overwhelming. Political strife, depressing. What impact do we have? Well, I can't get climate change to stop, but when Dee reminds me to unplug the fridge downstairs to save on electricity, that right there is an impact. It's an impact not only on the utility bill here at church, but also on the environment and what we're doing. John making sure the doors are locked so that the children are safe in RE is making an impact with compassion by encouraging spiritual growth and ensuring that our children are safe when they're in RE. The League of Women Voters moderating in a respectful manner our local discussions with our legislators creates an impact because it helps create compassion and dialogue with elected officials. The Pride Alliance reminding us that everyone is valued with inherent worth and dignity is creating a space where friendships can be made and we can overcome even the greatest of challenges. Those three principles. Think back to what we were talking about, and now to think back to the things that we do on a daily basis. It's quite the accomplishment. Justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Yesterday I came up to the church and I sat with Marlene for a little bit while she was hosting the bake sale. And Marlene shared with me some of her concerns. And it's really one of those things where fighting for justice is not always easy. We can fight for the things we believe in and follow through. And sometimes people won't show up. Sometimes people we consider our friends may not make it. And it is with equity and compassion in our human relations that we learn from those experiences. We lend a listening ear when others need us as a friend. And we grow as individuals. And we raise each other up and we support each other. It is how we grow, and it is how we change and make an impact on the world. Acknowledging the accomplishments of others while recognizing the things that we could do better on, the things that we can improve on. We create friendship, we provide compassion, and we encourage others in their own journeys. Think about the friends in your life. When have they supported you? When have they lifted you up? Maybe they've had to help tear you down to remind you of what's important. In my silence practicing some of the Quaker traditions and trying to see what would come to the surface, I was reminded of the importance of friendship and what those friends hold in this community. Silence is an amazing thing. Sometimes we just have to listen to it. As we go forward with our spring sermon series on love, death, and taxes, may we remember these three principles and the impact that we can all have on a daily basis. In this journey together, we can deepen our existing friendships and in living the principles, create new friendships, ever expanding our horizons. May we gather as friends, celebrate our diversity, and lift each other up to our highest potential, knowing that we are stronger